Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the April 26, 2017 award ceremony and briefing session for the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining. And we welcome you all to here today. This is momentous. Just a brief procedural announcement. We will be going to agenda item number 5 and then to agenda item number 3. And then we'll start with back on agenda item number 1. Those two agenda items, number 5 and number 3, should be fairly easy to get through, and then will let us get to the meat of our day. Before we start giving the awards, it's, I think, interesting to think about some things. To have a legacy that lasts for generations, to make a difference in the world, to look at our, for example, the national parks or state parks or national monuments or forestry or the benefit to the state from our industries. It's a great opportunity and privilege to be able to make a difference, to be able to go back to your office and know that the world's a better place because of what you've done. And while we mean to honor you today with our Earth Day Awards, you really honor us much more by what you do, how you do it, and in the difference that you make. And in saying that, we are saying that to the regulators, our good division, who I think foster a culture of excellence, and certainly to your companies that also have embraced the notion of excellence, going the extra mile and making a difference. So for that, we say thank you very much. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that. Rich, would you like to say something?
Sure. I would like to just add...
a little closer to the mic.
Sure. I would just like to add that I think these awards are really important for highlighting that responsible development of the resources our society needs can be done by minimizing impacts during operation and restoring the land afterwards. And I just want to applaud all the award recipients today for showing the way forward towards great practice, which I hope someday will become industry standard practice throughout the state.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? With that, then, we are going to start. Here's how it will kind of progress. The presenter will come to the podium, make the presentation. We invite you, the members of the company, to come up and then to receive the award. At that time, or when we're through, then we will go out into the lobby and take group pictures of each company, and I believe that's the procedure for this morning. Then we'll come back in here and start our briefing session. So with that, I will get started. Our first award today is to Canyon Fuel Company, Sufco Mine. Canyon Fuel Sufco Mine is receiving an Earth Day Award for their habitat improvement projects in the Sufco Mine area in the Fish Lake National Forest in Sevier County. Sufco Mine coordinated with several wildlife preservation and livestock organizations and biologists from the U.S. Forest Service to implement techniques protecting critical wildlife habitat and developing a healthy environment for wildlife and livestock. The waste rock sediment pond was expanded and designed to provide access to drinking water for elk, deer, moose, and livestock. Sufco staff engineered a water distribution pipeline from a nearby creek to gravity feed water to nearby ponds that historically have been dry or very low by midsummer, providing an important water source for wildlife and livestock. 2 water collection systems with guzzlers were installed, and an existing guzzler site was refurbished. Sufco supplied the materials, and the work was completed by Sufco employees, Forest Service personnel, and representatives from the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, dedicated hunter program, and the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. With that, we'd invite Sufco mine folks to come forward, please. I'm going to invite you to introduce yourselves and tell us what you do for Canyon Fuels and the Sufco mine.
My name is Vicki Miller. I'm an environmental engineer at Sufco Mine.
My name is Jake Smith, and I am the engineering manager at Sufco Mine.
With that, come on over here. I'm going to have some pictures. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure and honor to present this next award, Earth Day Award, to Alpine Gems LLC, and it will be presented to Ben Lamoureux. Alpine Gems LLC is receiving an Earth Day Award for their reclamation work at the Butler Valley Quarries, located within the Grand Staircase National Monument in Kane County. After losing their mining claim in the Grand Staircase National Monument due to a late payment, the BLM required the state to be reclaimed. Not the whole state yet. Required the site to be reclaimed. While reclaiming the site, the BLM asked if Mr. Lamoureux would reclaim an abandoned 13-acre quarry approximately 2 miles away. Without any funding from the BLM or obligation by Alpine Gems, Mr. Lamoureux reclaimed the abandoned quarry. When asked by the division staff why he completed the reclamation work, he stated that his reward was doing the right thing by caring about the environment and cleaning up the mining scars left by others. Mr. Lamoureux, if you're here today, if you'd like to come forward. This certainly goes above and beyond any requirements, and especially, I'm sure it was not the most, the easiest thing to do after you'd been denied your claim.
It wasn't, but we needed to do it.
And if you'd like to introduce yourself and say anything about your operation.
Ben Lamoureux, I'm the manager for Alpine Gems. Family has a history of 50 years in the mining business, and this is a good way to recognize that with some environmental sensitive reclaim. It's okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'm excited to present this next award to Anadarko Petroleum Corporation, represented by Casey McKee. Anadarko Construction and Reclamation Teams, Anadarko Petroleum Corporation is receiving an Earth Day Award for their Greater Natural Buttes Reclamation and Seeding Project in Uinta County. Anadarko Construction and Reclamation Teams set a goal to more effectively and efficiently increase soil stability and fertility by changing reclamation practices on contouring and seeding throughout the Greater Natural Buttes area. They implemented surface roughening to significantly reduce soil compaction and erosion on reclaimed slopes. Roughening the surface also increased water penetration, native seed retention and germination, and vegetative root depth. Seeding practices were changed so that native seed placement allowed more seed contact with native soils, increasing native seed germination rates. The implementation of these two changes allowed reclamation areas to establish a vegetative and natural landscape faster than previous reclamation practices. In 2016, Anadarko reclaimed and recontoured 220 acres and seeded approximately 188 acres. The remaining 32 acres were seeded the first few months of 2017. Casey, if you're here, I'd like to have you come up. Just want to congratulate you. I think it's a great project. I've seen a lot of reclamation all around the world, and yours is world class. Thank you.
I'm Casey McKee. I'm the HSC representative for Anadarko Petroleum Corporation.
Frank Eaton, construction manager for the Greater Natural Buttes.
Got to wait for the photo, right?
This next award is for Rio Tinto, Kennecott, Utah Copper. Rio Tinto, Kennecott Copper, Utah, is receiving an Earth Day Award for their East Waste Rock Extension Project. The new project footprint allows for the continuation of mining and waste rock placement that will support reclamation, revegetation of the outer slope of the new waste rock dumps. Preparation included moving the water collection infrastructure, salvaging 11 million cubic yards of growth media for future reclamation, and the enhancement of the storm water detention basins. A total of 12 stormwater detention basins were constructed in the 11 drainages. The basins were sized to manage surface water runoff from the reclaimed waste rock face for a 100-year, 24-hour rain event. As you can see from the monitor, this project is really massive and has a huge effect on the future and the outcome of the mining operation there. And it's my honor to present this award. Would those that are here for Rio Tinto come forward? Congratulations and well done.
Zeb Kenyon, East Waste Rock, Senior Advisor for Environmental Compliance and Quality.
Scott Bird, Manager, HSE&C.
Jason Hill, Project Engineer.
We want to thank all of you. We received some wonderful applications this year for Earth Day Awards, and we picked the very best. And so as you go back to talk to your management, to your shareholders, to your customers and citizens of your area, we again want to thank you for the job that you've done. And we hope that you'll compete and apply again in the future. And it'll be our pleasure to see you back here. So thank you very much. We'll now move to the foyer where we're going to have the group photos. It'll be near the bottom of the stairs. And so if we could ask Canyon Fuel that you'll be first in this, we'll take the same order as the presentations. Again, thank you so much for what you've done. We'll be starting in about 1 minute or less. For the record, this is the April 26, 2017 briefing session of the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining. We've just had a great award ceremony for Earth Day, and we gave away 4 well-earned awards. We're now to the briefing session, and to you, Mr. Baza, before you get started, I would mention to the other board members and to the audience, I attended the Waxy Crude Conference out in Duchesne, and it was very well attended, and how you snagged Senator Mike Lee as your keynote speaker is still going to be a little bit of a...
That just kind of fell into place.
It was but it was surely well done. And John, you and your John Rogers sure did a nice job on your part of it. And then having U-Star kind of take their lead and do what they did. For those of you that haven't been to the new Duchesne County Convention Center and Rodeo Grounds, it was a very excellent place to have a conference, and it's what, a year old now?
Maybe a couple of years.
Couple of years.
It's pretty new.
But it was very, very nice. So with that, Mr. Baza.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gill, and welcome members of the board. Again, my name is John Baza. I'm the director for the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, and this is our briefing session to the board on April 26, 2017. First of all, as is tradition, I like to introduce new employees when we hire them into the division. And we've hired a couple of new people in our coal program to replace individuals who have left. And if these individuals would stand as I introduce each of them, I'd like you to recognize them as new faces in the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. First of all, we have Artie Umarvardia. Artie is been hired and started working earlier this month as a hydrologist in our coal program. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in geology from Virginia Tech. She went on to work in the coal program at 2 state regulatory agencies, Pennsylvania and West Virginia, where she was exposed to water-related impacts from coal mining. She subsequently completed her master's in hydrology from West Virginia University. For her thesis, Artie completed a baseline hydrologic characterization of an undisturbed area expected to undergo natural gas development. Artie joined us 2 months ago from the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area. The second employee is Justin Etchell. Justin has been hired as an engineer in our coal program, and he is a graduate of the University of Utah. Justin has over 10 years of experience working in the mining industry in Utah. While enrolled in college, he spent 2 summers as an intern for DOGM, locating and documenting coal mine subsidence throughout the Book Cliffs and Wasatch Plateau. Justin possesses both surface and underground mining experience and is eager to bring a unique and diverse set of skills and abilities to confront the challenges present in Utah's coal mining industry. And Justin started for us just this week. And we appreciate both of these employees coming and engaging in the activities of state government in DOGM. So welcome to them.
Well, on behalf of the board, welcome to excellence.
Okay. The next thing, it's actually the second item on our briefing agenda, is we have a item of rulemaking in our minerals program, and I'll turn the time over to James Owen, who will give you a good explanation as to what we've got going on there.
And please forgive our presenter, he has one final left for his law degree, and I know that's both an exciting and a dreary time.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Gill, members of the board, I'm James Owen. I'm serving as the division's legislative liaison. So the division has initiated a rulemaking process for an informal rulemaking process for our minerals program, as John mentioned. This rulemaking has been touched on in previous briefing sessions, but at this point we're ready to have it be move forward to its next step. This rulemaking will impact both small and large minerals mines in Utah, and the focus is going to be on the topic of suspension of operations. To give a brief roadmap of what we'll be talking about, the first thing I'll review is a flow chart of our informal rulemaking process. It'll be useful to see how the process works and where we are from here. And if it's a chart you've seen before, it'll be a good refresher to see kind of what the board's role will be as we move through the steps. We'll talk about where the idea for this rulemaking came from, and then we'll discuss the division's needs and the reasons behind the rulemaking in kind of three main categories, kind of focused on that definition of suspension, and then also a couple of smaller but important items that relate to some inconsistencies we've found, and then also making some of our annual report information more meaningful. And then to finish out, we'll request the board's consent to proceed. And of course, please ask questions anytime. If as I'm going through it, if the questions arise, please ask them. So this is our informal rulemaking flowchart, and the process works. It starts off by an idea or a concept for a rule, and those can come from anywhere, from the legislature, from the board, from within the division, OSM or any other federal agency, stakeholders, industry, public, any interest groups. And then once the idea has been presented to the division, we have kind of two ways we can go with it. And box number 2 here is what we call pre-collaboration. And that's essentially the division's opportunity to do some homework. We reach out to any particular stakeholders that we think might be able to provide us some insight. Sometimes that collaboration can include emails or even sit-down meetings where we discuss the concept that's on the table and kind of get some initial feedback. Once we've completed that collaboration, or even if we choose, we can move directly into box number 3 here, which is to present the topic to the board, and that's what we're doing today. And this gives the board the opportunity to have an informal discussion in a public briefing session so that the information is available. And then after, and a part of this process is that we request board input. And at this point, the board can kind of go one of two ways. It can either recommend that we not move forward with rulemaking, or it can give its consent to move to our next step. Once we get that consent, we move to box number 7, which is to draft the rule itself and then distribute the draft rules to what we call our informal rules review group. And that is a compilation of different organizations, state agencies, federal agencies, industry representatives, environmental groups, a wide variety of stakeholders. And we give that group an opportunity to provide us comments. And this comment period is something that we can set the length just depending on how complicated we may think the issue is or how much time we'd like to give that group to review. Once we have those comments back, we move here to box number 9, and we report any comments or any issues back to the board. And the board may recommend one thing or another. Here in step 10, we get the board's input, and we can kind of go 3 ways. Either, again, suggest to not move forward with the rulemaking, to advise some modifications and move us back to sending it back to the informal rules review group, which would send us through this process again, and we can go through that process as many times as necessary to iron out wrinkles. And then the third option would be to proceed to the formal rulemaking process. And so I do have a separate flow chart for formal rulemaking, but because that's not the topic, I do have it available if you'd like to discuss it. But where we are right here for this particular rulemaking is we've just completed box number 2. We've gone through our pre-collaboration phase. And so this presentation is 3. And what we'd like to accomplish today is to kind of check boxes 3, 4, and 6 and get the board's consent to move on to number 7.
Okay.
So the idea for this rule change initially came from a concerned citizen, and they brought the issue to the attention of the division. And once we reviewed the issue that was presented to us, the division recognized that there were indeed some valid concerns. And so we initiated kind of an internal review, and as part of that review, we identified some additional related changes that also needed to be made. So the idea came from a citizen as well as our own internal review. And again, I want to point out that this does, and this would impact both small and large non-coal mining operations. And the specific regulations that would be changed are R647.3 and R647.4. So I've broken down kind of our three large main topic reasons for this rule change. And the first one is that we essentially lack, or we lack a definition in our minerals rules for suspension. And because we have no definition for suspension, we also lack the authority to require maintenance during suspension. And that's kind of the big topic. And the second, numbers 2 and 3, are ones that we identified as we were going through the review of that initial lack of definition. And that is that we found some inconsistencies between the statute and the rules we currently have. And then third, we identified that the annual report information that was that is required to be submitted to us is not as meaningful as what it could be. So focusing on the first one, that lack of definition. So essentially the rationale that the division presents for needing a definition is that we need to understand why mining operations have suspended, when they've gone into suspension, and then what we can expect in the future. Kind of fundamental concepts of regulation is where are we now and why, and where do we plan on going from here? And because we don't know what suspension means under the rules, then we kind of are lacking those two guiding points. And so because that is the case, then under current rules, a mine could technically be suspended indefinitely. And that's assuming that they are maintaining their permit fees and reclamation surety, but there kind of is no window. It's kind of out in limbo. And so that indefinite suspension is a potential. I know sometimes it's nice to put a face to the name, and so I've included a few photos of some of the operations that are in this category. Without going into details about the operators or the specific sites, this is a site that right now has been in suspension or has been inactive for 15 years. This is another one. You can see a pit and a couple of high walls there. This one has been inactive for 8 years. And this is another one, also a couple of high walls, that's been inactive for 8 years. Or that was inactive for 8 years. So essentially, what we'd like to highlight is some of the issues that this is causing for us. So because we don't have a definition of suspension, the main thing that this creates is uncertainty for both the division and for the operator. And to borrow one of Chairman Gill's terms, we would like our minerals operators to know the rules of the game. And essentially, this game has no rules. And so we're lacking there. Also, our rules don't require an interim management plan. And what this creates is uncertainty relating to public safety, environmental hazards, and even site maintenance. We're not really sure exactly where these things sit, which is kind of what we would need to be sure of as a regulatory agency. Also, the rules don't require the board's periodic review of any operations that have been approved for suspension. So that creates uncertainty on the board's part, and also allows for that potential indefinite suspension that we'd like to avoid. And finally, the rules don't distinguish between suspension and termination. So that creates confusion relating to the reclamation timeline requirements. We don't know when they have to reclaim based on whether or not they're in suspension or termination. So I put up a hypo here to kind of give an example. A question that might be asked is, okay, so we have some good old miners that are just waiting for a good market price, and they're hoping that their commodity price increases. So if we have some good actors that are in that category, what would the rule look like? And again, we haven't gone through the process of having the rule drafted, but what we would envision is that our rules would specify activities that are considered as active operations. And then if an operator was not involved in those activities, they would be considered to be in suspension. And if they were in suspension, then they would need to inform the division about how long that suspension was anticipated to continue. And the rules would say, building on the rules we have, that if they were going to be in suspension for greater than 2 years, they would need to provide information to the division, including an interim management plan, so that we could know what their plan is in terms of public safety, environmental concerns, and also site maintenance. And then if they were to be in suspension for longer than 5 years, they would need to obtain OGM's approval for that suspension. They would need to provide us timelines and reasons. And also, if the division did not give approval, then we could move them into reclamation. And then for something that is greater than 10 years, they would be required to reclaim unless they appealed to this board and requested the opportunity to continue, and this board would use its discretion in determining how long of an extension could be given. So that's what we would be looking towards for the rules once we are in the weeds of the draft. Shifting gears a little bit to our second point, the inconsistencies that we discovered. So there are a couple of them that relate to withdrawal of a notice of intention. And essentially what it is, the rules allow for the division to withdraw a notice for failure to pay the permit fees, but the statute doesn't have anything about that. And so what we'd like to do is eliminate the language in our rules so that the rules correspond to the statute. And on the flip side, the statute allows the notice to be withdrawn if the operator is conducting operations in a way that that reclamation can't be achieved according to their plan, but the rules don't have a corresponding provision. So we would like to add language to that portion to make the rules correspond to the statute. A bit of house cleaning for both, but both could have some positive impacts for the division. And then our third issue with annual reports. Essentially right now our reporting requirements mandate that the operators provide us information about gross ore and the waste they produced. And what we would like to do is add to that requirement that they need to provide us information about the products of primary processing, which is what the division regulates, and that would bring us more in line with what other states require of the same type of mines. And also we would like a requirement, currently they are required to provide us a description of the reclamation work that's done, but it doesn't, they're not required to tell us their acreage figures on that work. And so if we have a requirement that they give us those acreage figures, that will allow us to have more information that relates to calculating surety bonds and making sure that their surety is proper. So with kind of those three categories, where we move from here is a request to the division, and we would like to ask for any input the board has at this time, and then also request the board's consent to proceed. And again, I've got the chart back up here. What we're asking is to complete boxes 4 and 6, and we're asking the board's consent to draft the rule and distribute it to the informal rules review group.
Thank you very much. Board members, any comments or questions or suggestions?
I have a couple.
Okay, speaking, whichever mic you want.
Looking at this slide right here, box number 1, stakeholder, who have you reached out to small and large operators to get their input on this yet?
Yeah, we have. So the two stakeholders that we reached out to see if they had any initial input was the Utah Mining Association and then also the Association of General Contractors, representing both those large and small interests. We did have a sit-down meeting with the Utah Mining Association, but we didn't get any initial feedback. I think that those agencies or those associations would be interested in looking at the draft rules to see what they'll actually look like. And this pre-collaboration phase box number 2 is something that we do as a courtesy so that we can kind of do our homework at the outset. But all of those stakeholders will have plenty of opportunity to comment in this portion here, as well as when we move to the formal process, then there will be a mandatory notice and comment as well. So all the stakeholders, both large and small, would have opportunities.
Mr. Hanson, I think James mentioned that this was initiated on a citizen concern that was provided to us. We've included that citizen and their representative group in these discussions so that they know what's going on.
Thank you. The second question I had to do with the number of years and how it was determined whether or not you would essentially require the operator to go into reclamation. And there was a comment that it would be determined by the division how they would approve whether or not this operator would be required to go into reclamation. You know, in other words, you would evaluate their reasons for suspension, and then evaluate their reasons when they came back and said, "Look, I need a little more time." Have you developed a basis on how you would determine whether or not they had a legitimate reason to suspend their operations for a period beyond 5 years or 10 years?
So the actual drafting portion is still ongoing, and there are definitely still some questions related to exactly what it would look like when the division provided that approval and what measures the division would use to determine whether or not they could be approved. And so because we haven't moved into this rule drafting phase, we haven't fleshed all of that out. But once we have it down, then we would definitely have a list of requirements and the things the division would consider in giving that approval or denying it.
And if you have input on that, we would certainly appreciate that input.
Absolutely.
Well, as soon as we put some sideboards on this, it'll be easier to make an evaluation and comments.
Right, and that's the idea. The idea is once we have a rule drafted, then we'll get it out to everybody, and we like this to be as collaborative as possible.
My first concern, and to be perfectly honest, is that there are market conditions that may extend beyond 5 to 10 years. So we need to be, I think, careful not to box ourselves into something that says, you know, we've got a hard date here. We've created these rules that don't give us enough leeway to make a rational, well, maybe, but you know, a well thought out ruling or determination. It would be a shame to cause an operator to go into reclamation at a time shortly before something good happens for them, or you know, we lose access to a resource that would be difficult to then go back into and re-access.
So I guess I would have a question to pose to the board too, and the two individuals who are here with substantial mining experience, where we've indicated some time frames, you know, the 2-year, the 5-year, and then the 10-year, where frankly they would be expected to move into reclamation. Are those time frames reasonable to you in your experience as industry professionals?
May I say something?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. Dana Dean, Associate Director of the Division. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the 5 and 10-year timeframes are already in the rules. What we are trying to define is what is suspension. And right now, those 50 mines that are inactive, there is no clear basis to say, you've been in suspension for 5 years, you need to do X, Y, and Z. All of those things are already in the rules. It's just not clear when to say someone's in suspension or not. So we're not implementing these time frames. They're already in the rules. We're just trying to make it clear so that we know when someone needs to come take that action, and they know when they need to take that action. The 2 years we put in there just to say, you know, we don't want to wait till the last day of the 5th year and they get told to reclaim instead of being able to move forward. We are totally looking at if people are maintaining their sites and they're a legitimate company that is just waiting for market conditions to improve and things are good on their site, I think we very much would approve that moving forward. And then at the 10th year, it would be up to the board to approve that moving forward. We're just trying to differentiate between the people that are doing that and people who are just walking away and we can't even contact them for 10 years. And then we end up having to pull their bond and do their reclamation anyway. So we're not trying to penalize anyone. We're just trying to clarify the rule so that we know who needs to report when under the current rule that already requires a report to the division at 5 years and to come before the board at 10 years. So we're not implementing that. That's already in the rule. We're just clarifying what conditions at the mine require you to do that.
Well, I appreciate that clarification.
Yes, and sorry to interrupt, but
I didn't believe that the division was trying to be punitive. I hope I didn't give
no,
that impression.
No, I just want you to know that we're just trying to make it easier for everyone to know when certain things need to happen. Once we heard from this citizen, we realized that it is not clear. It would be much better, and we would all have better coverage if it were clear, and people were able to file these notices at the proper time, and then we don't get to a situation where we have some mines that have not given us an interim. Under the current rules, you could say, oh, you've been in suspension for 10 years, and suddenly you have to reclaim and you have no recourse. We don't want to do that. We want to clarify the rule and leave the opportunity open for companies that are looking for market conditions to improve, but weed out the people that are just avoiding reclamation. And so
Thank you.
I hope that helps. Sorry to interrupt again.
Don't leave. You may have other questions. Mr. Borden.
I'd like to start by saying I do see merit in providing some clarity here, because it does seem like there's a lot of ambiguity. The rulemaking will need to be carefully crafted, I think, because we don't want to discourage the operations that do have resource left in the ground from doing the sustainable thing, which is to finish the removal of that resource and then doing the rehab. So it gives me some comfort what you said about trying to differentiate between those that have a valid economic future and are waiting for market conditions to become better than those that are perhaps just trying to defer the responsibility of reclaiming the land after the resource has already been depleted in that area.
And I think it's really easy to tell which is happening.
I would hope that at the 10-year time frame, if the site was showing good or was being operated well in the suspension, there were no risks to the environment or public health and safety, and there was a valid economic path forward, that you could get an extension for longer than 10 years.
Yes, I believe the rules, they require the board to approve that, but there is that opportunity. And that's exactly, we're just trying to clarify when someone needs to come ask for that to give them the safety of having that decision and being able to say, we have kept this site up. There are no environmental risks. There are no public safety hazards. And we're just waiting for an upturn or different market conditions. And so there definitely is that. It would be up to the board to make that decision at the 10 years. But that definitely is there.
Thank you.
Just a couple of comments. Number one, I'd like to get a copy for the board emailed to the board of the flow chart.
Okay.
Number two, I'd like the flow chart available when we discuss item number 5.
Absolutely.
And that'll be first up.
Okay.
And
I do have both informal and formal.
We'd like to have those. There is actually a step that would like to have you consider as you look at this flow chart.
Okay.
And we'll discuss that when we get to that point. Board members, I believe, would you like to sum at all, or?
I think we've summed up pretty well. The last part is just that the official request for the consent to proceed.
That's how I read it too. So, board members, the time is ripe for a motion to proceed in the informal rulemaking step. What is your pleasure? Okay, there's a motion to move forward. Is it seconded?
Seconded.
Okay, board members, any discussion? Seeing none, the motion before you is to give the board's approval to move forward with the informal rulemaking procedure and process for defining suspension and the other things that have come before you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record show that that was unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. And thanks, James. The item number 3 on our briefing agenda is to talk to you about our upcoming May field trip. And if John Rogers would come forward. There he is. John has put together, I think, an excellent itinerary, and I'll just go ahead and let him explain that to you.
Good morning, Chairman Gill, members of the board. As you're aware, our next board hearing will be in Vernal, Utah on May 24th. That is a Wednesday. So as usual, we'll be traveling out there the day before and I've planned a field trip, and I'll just give you a brief outline what we'll be doing. We'll be meeting out here the north doors about 7:15 and trying to leave there as soon after as we can. It's about a 3-hour drive to Vernal without stop, so throw that in there. And we'll meet at the DNR field office in Vernal. So those who are going to drive on their own or from other areas will meet there about 10:30, planning to leave for Deseret Power, which is about a 40-minute drive south of Vernal from there. We plan on arriving at Deseret Power about 11:30, and we'll meet for safety training and presentation. And they have asked me to just go over a little bit of the safety issues of what we'll need to know, and so we'll be prepared. They want to have proper personal protection gear available, which will be hard hats, earplugs, and safety glasses. They will provide that for us, but it must be worn at all times on the tour. Also, there'll be no open-toed shoes. Heels are not allowed, and no shorts or skirts will be allowed. And shoes, they prefer steel-covered boots, but if you don't have those, they're not required, but at least have shoes that cover your whole foot. So we'll meet that and have our safety briefing there. We'll have lunch at the power plant, and we'll begin our tour about 12:30, and we'll depart from there between 2 and 3 hours later. There's an option that they suggested, the individuals out there, that we go to a scenic outlet called Fantasy Canyon. Have you heard of that or know of that? It's out there, and they suggested those who'd like to go, that's about a 20-30 minute out of the way drive, but it's something on the BLM land that's quite a unique rock formations. Those geologists on the board may find that unique. Lawyers, I'm not so sure. So, Mr. Gill, you can come.
I'm in.
Okay.
I'm in.
Well, we'll make that determination when we're out there, and we'll return to the Vernal area about 5:30. And we'll have a dinner at the Vernal Brewing Company at 6:30. Okay, so that will be our plan. Any questions, feel free to contact us. Julianne will get out the detailed agenda to you, I'm sure, by email before the time.
Board members, any questions? Speaking of beautiful overlooks, in Dinosaur National Monument, up against the river, there's a camping spot and a boat ramp that's just up against a beautiful, absolutely vertical cliff. If you've never had a chance to see that, that's something that really is stunning. So with that, yeah, it sounds like a great trip. Anyone want to comment on it or make suggestions? With that, then, we appreciate that. Thank you for the add-ons and the other parts to it. Thank you.
Okay.
While John is still up here, and as you know, he's the Associate Director for our Oil and Gas Program, they've been doing some, what I think is excellent work in terms of defining their standard operating procedures for the work that they do. And I'd like John to just take a minute under our other items and talk about that for a minute, because I really think it's great work.
Well, I've been in a little bit of fear and denial, recognizing that much of my staff has 30-plus years with the division, and they have a bad day, they may just walk out. So we got together and under the direction of Dan Jarvis, our operations manager, and thought we'd put together a standard operating procedure, internal guidance for what we do on our inspection program. As you realize, when you in the state program, it's not like you train someone up to take a position and then they transfer over. It's like, boom, they're gone, and that institutional knowledge is out the door. And a lot of these individuals are very bright, very dedicated employees, have been here a long time. So through Dan Jarvis and Brad Hill, our permitting manager, we came up with some standard operating procedures through some of our field workers. And some of those that have been very involved in this are Bart Kettle of our Price office, Amy Duboulet of our Vernal office, and Amanda McDonald, our Salt Lake City office. We put together some already, have them completed, and this just basically spells out what our inspectors do and how to do it and the best practices to make sure we do that, and we have a continuous flow of the procedures. Some of the things we've done already is our standard inspection procedures, our exploration, production, reclamation standards, inspection type definition. And through this, we've also come up with a weighted inspection tracker. So sometimes we have been tracked on just looking at one inspection, counts as one inspection, but that could be as easily as a drive-by that may take you a few minutes, or a spill or a MIT that may take you most of the day or all week. And so we've tried to weight out how we measure our success in that area, because we're getting more and more pressure to show how we spend our time and what we do it. So this will go a long way to showing what we're doing in the division. So I'd like to acknowledge those individuals who have been working very hard on these procedures, and we have more that are coming, but it's good to have that knowledge put there that'll be a legacy for many individuals long after they've left the division.
Board members, any comments? On this item and then the other item on the rulemaking, it appears to me that even when you get it right, you should always ask, how could we have done it better? And obviously you're doing a lot of things right because of the customer polling that you do annually. And I believe you're the only one in the state that does that, but there might be others. I'm just unaware of them. But yeah, you're on the right path. You're asking the right questions, and you're doing the right things and with regard to that, and we'd encourage that. Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers.
The only other thing I'm going to cover with you before I turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, is our upcoming calendar. And I'll mention briefly that the Governor's Energy Summit is next week. I know we have a few board members registered for that, those who have asked, and maybe if you haven't asked to be registered as a board member, perhaps you're registering with your own company. But that is taking place next week on the 3rd and the 4th, Wednesday and Thursday, so hopefully you'll enjoy that. The following week, the 7th through the 9th, is the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact's annual meeting. And because we have suffered some travel restrictions because of budgetary constraints, the only person going to that this time is Mr. Rogers, who will be representing the great state of Utah and interacting with the other states of the IOGCC, and he's going to be attending that.
Okay, look forward to it.
Yeah. That's going to be in Oklahoma City, and I know the calendar may say something different, but that is in Oklahoma City. The other thing that I'll bring up along those lines is that Mr. Rogers is also involved in some other groups that under IOGCC's banner. There's a natural gas storage group that is working on a fine report that should be out fairly soon, and he's also been involved in what is called I think it's a shut-in well or idle well work group that is examining across the United States how idle wells or shut-in wells are handled. And I think the thing that I've seen from that, as John has briefed me on those discussion calls, is that we're doing about as good as any other state in terms of managing and working through our compliance issues on shut-in wells. And I think that's great credit to the oil and gas program and the people that are working hard on that. The last thing I'll mention relative to IOGCC is that Dan Jarvis is also going to be participating in what is called inspection training that IOGCC conducts. And it started a couple of years ago in Salt Lake City. Dan was involved in that, provided some inspection training for a national inspectors group with IOGCC, and he's been invited back, and they pay his expenses to do this on an annual basis. So I think that's great credit to Dan that he's recognized as an expert in the regulatory world for inspections, and we want to recognize that he's doing that. And that's about it, other than preparing for our board field trip and meeting in Vernal next month, and then, of course, the following week after that is Memorial Day. So So
Thank you very much.
that's all I had to brief you on, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, so I'll turn the time back to you.
Mr. Rogers, a couple of years ago, the division hosted a bunch of other states on some common issues, and it was surprising how different the other states were. When you come back from the ILGCC, would you give us a report on how that collaboration is, whether it's getting any traction or what's happening on it? And then I also noticed that there was a fracking report that came out. I haven't had a chance to read it or even an article on it that showed that there was no contamination of drinking water. I don't know if you've seen that. I'd be interested to learn more about that. For the board members, we had all the regulators in the country at a ILGCC meeting in Buffalo, New York, and I was bold enough to ask a question to the whole group, and that was, what instances has any state seen a direct correlation between fracking and contamination of groundwater, with the exception of Pavilion, Wyoming, where they're co-located and have been for 100 years? And the answer came back none, 0. And it was a very interesting experience to see that and to have that, even that level of a discussion on the issue. So I'd be interested to see where that is, and kind of maybe a sub-report or what's going on fracking in terms of groundwater, seismic events, and any other issues on fracking that are at the top of the agenda. And if you could find anything out about that at the ILGCC meeting, we'd appreciate it. Anything else? With that, then, I believe we are at the point where the board invites public comment on any matter within our jurisdiction. If anyone is here from the public that would like to address the board, we would invite you to come forward and give us your input. Seeing none, then, Julianne, are we going to start at 10 o'clock sharp? Okay. Seeing no public comment or anyone coming forward, then we will be in a break until 10 a.m. And at that time, we're going to start with agenda item number 5. Mr. Owen, you'll have your flow chart available. And board members, we do have some things we'd like to talk about in the break, and so we would invite you to join us in the conference in the other room. Thank you.